Hello, and welcome to this brief PowerPoint on medical aid in dying and human euthanasia. So medical aid in dying was initially called physician-assisted suicide and then kind of changed to physician-assisted dying or physician-assisted death. And now the state laws that have been passed in states where it's legal are generally referred to as medical aid in dying or MAID.
Since I'm at CSU, I'm going to use Colorado as an example for medical aid in dying. So we passed our medical aid in dying bill in 2016 and then made some revisions to it in 2024. And so what our requirements are, which are, similar in other states too, is you have to be 18 years or older. You do have to be a Colorado resident. I've heard that now I think for Oregon, you don't actually have to be a resident of the state. You have to have a prognosis of 6 months or less to live. So similar to hospice in that kind of terminal illness with 6 months or less. You have to have full mental capacity, which creates challenges, right, for Alzheimer's or dementia, right? Because generally you wouldn't be considered to have full mental capacity at the time that you have 6 months or less to live. So this doesn't in Colorado usually apply to people with dementia or Alzheimer's. You have to submit 2 oral and written requests for aid in dying medications at least 7 days apart. Initially, this was 15 days, and then it was reduced to 7. This can be waived if the patient is unlikely to survive 2 days and meets some other requirements. So they've tried to kind of speed that up because, as I learned when my mother-in-law was obtaining medical aid in dying medications in, I think this was 2021, it was a very slow process. It was closer to a month because you had to be verified by 2 physicians. Now that also includes advanced nurse practitioners, and you had to make these requests over time and have meetings with all of them, and just scheduling all of those appointments. The verification process had to be in person. It was taking closer to a month. So I think they've tried to kind of speed that process up, but you could expect that it might still be hard to get it to happen in 7 days. And then you have to still be capable of self-administering and ingesting. Here in Colorado, that's either drinking it or inserting it in your feeding tube. But in some states, self-ingesting can include noting your intent to self-ingest. So head tipping or your hand to push a button, but someone could actually help you do it. But the act our act prohibits any coercion from insurance companies, to try to kind of encourage you to use medical aid in dying.
Okay, so I think Colorado's rules are likely pretty typical. Medical professionals can decide whether or not they want to participate, so physicians aren't required, pharmacists aren't required in prescribing the medications. Right now, at least in Larimer County, MAID is part of the palliative care team and services, although there may be other doctors who are prescribing. It's not prescribed or administered by hospice. Hospice has always had that philosophy: we do not hasten death or prolong life. And so it has gone against their philosophy to engage in prescribing MAID medications. However, in my mother-in-law's case, Audrey, our hospice nurse, said that she could be present when Audrey took the medications and could be there to listen to her heart with a stethoscope and to pronounce her death. Just a little sense of numbers, and this has been the most recent that I could get, but in the 3 years following the legalization of MAID in Colorado, you can see that 365 persons were actually prescribed the aid in dying medications. 328 actually died with them. So a few maybe died before they could take them or decided not to use them. And over 830 Colorado physicians were prescribing. So it's not just a handful, it's fairly widespread. So just a little bit of background on this. how this came about was that in 1997, the Supreme Court basically gave each state the right to decide, did they want to legalize MAID or did they want to ban MAID? And right now, MAID, as of 2023, MAID is legal in 10 states, which you can see there. Okay, I have two brief videos that are important to watch on a famous medical aid in dying, or as it was referred to at that time, physician-assisted suicide case in the United States. So Brittany Maynard was a young woman diagnosed with fatal brain disease, and opted to participate, moved actually to Oregon to participate in medical aid in dying. So the first video clip is her just talking about her decision. It doesn't show the actual process. And then the second video clip is a follow-up after she died with her husband on Oprah talking about her death. So in class, we discussed the pros and cons of medical aid in dying. And some of the pros that students mention are that it gives patients a sense of control. And that was certainly the case for my mother-in-law. Her biggest fear was dying a slow, agonizing, painful death in a hospital and being a burden to her family. And so that gave her a sense of control that she could avoid that. And you can have your people with you, right? Because you know when you're going to die. It's a planned event if you want people with you. The cons are that you have to be able to self-administer. And as you saw on the Brittany Maynard story, she had a seizure disorder, and she was worried that if she waited too long, she would have a seizure that would prohibit her ability to either swallow or to bring a cup to her mouth and drink. And so sometimes people might feel like they have to take action sooner than maybe they'd love to have a couple more days, but they're worried that they're going to lose some of these abilities. Okay, so let's talk about some legalities in the United States related to medical aid in dying and human euthanasia. So we've been talking about medical aid in dying so far, where the patient is the actor, the physician is helping prescribe. That's considered an active form of dying. The patient takes the prescribed overdose to intentionally end their lives. It's voluntary. We know the patient wants it, and the patient is terminally ill with 6 months or less to live, in our estimation. In terms of human euthanasia in the United States, we're going to get to other countries on the next slide, but in the US, our only legal form of human euthanasia is the death penalty, right? Where a professional gives someone else an overdose that kills them. Obviously, animal euthanasia is legal, active animal euthanasia. So the forms of human euthanasia in the United States that would be considered legal would be called passive euthanasia. That means that you're not giving something that ends someone's life, but you might be withholding or withdrawing life-sustaining treatment, like a feeding tube or a ventilator or other life support techniques. This is obviously a controversial issue, when to withhold or withdraw life-sustaining treatment. So it's obviously easier if it's voluntary. If the person has a do not resuscitate order or a living will or another form of advance directive where they've indicated, I don't want to receive life-sustaining treatment in my current condition. But when people don't have those advance directives in place, then we don't know what they want, and that can make it more challenging. And then if they are in a, for example, persistent vegetative state, it makes it challenging to figure out who gets to decide if they don't have advance directives like a medical power of attorney. That's why those are so important, so that families aren't battling about decisions. Is the person terminally ill, less than 6 months to live, or not terminally ill? When the person we imagine is going to be dying anyway, then it's easier, right, for us. Not that it's easy, but it's easier to decide to withhold or withdraw life-sustaining treatment than if we don't, they're in a coma, but otherwise it's not a terminal illness, and we don't know how long they'll remain in that state. And then the last one is it considered an ordinary measure or an extraordinary measure? And that interacts with the distinctions above. So if we don't know what a patient wants, and they're in a persistent vegetative state. Now we're trying to decide, are they a young person who maybe was in a car accident and we're imagining that they might recover? Then it would be considered an ordinary measure to stay on life support treatment. But if it's an older person who we already know has disease progressions, that are likely to lead to their death soon, then that would be considered more like an extraordinary measure to keep them on life-sustaining treatment for a long period of time. And so, the medical ethics community, when doctors and staff are meeting to decide what to do about patients, this is often a conversation they're having. Is it ordinary that we should be keeping them on life-sustaining treatment, or is this extraordinary and we might be needing to withdraw it, which then is a passive form of euthanasia. So human euthanasia is only legal in a handful of countries worldwide, and you can see those listed on the slide. I also want you to watch this video in Belgium, kind of featuring human euthanasia, kind of talking about the legalities of it. As the video states, Belgium is also the only country as of 2023 to allow a child to have human euthanasia, a terminally ill child. But as far as I know, that has not been implemented yet. It's on the books, but it hasn't been enacted. As you'll see in the video, Belgium also does allow human euthanasia for severe and untreatable mental illness. And they don't allow euthanasia for kids in that case, only for adults. The film is tough to watch in that it does feature the euthanasia of an at-home euthanasia of a woman who's severely depressed. It's all peaceful, but still, it's pretty intense. I'd say when I do this poll in class, more students are still on the more pros than cons, but maybe a little more ambivalent than just for medical aid in dying. The pros that students will identify are, again, that sense of control, less fear of a painful or slow death, you can have your people with you. And then the additional pro compared to MAID is that you don't have to worry about self-administering. And so maybe you can go a little bit longer knowing that you're not relying on your own ability to swallow or bring a cup to your mouth. Might be nice knowing that you'll have for sure a doctor with you in case anything should go awry. The cons sometimes that students bring up is, does it make it too easy, right? If someone else is doing it and you don't have to actually do it yourself, or is there any part of you that once the doctor's there, even if you're having second thoughts, you're like, okay, well, I brought the doctor here, I should just go forward. So those were the main pros and cons. Okay, this one tends to be much more controversial in class. Pros and cons for the legalization of euthanasia in the cases of severe mental illness or psychiatric illness. And again, as you saw in the video, that's usually deemed to be untreatable by more than one doctor and have existed for a long period of time, and the patient has to have made multiple requests over time, so it's not just kind of a spur of the moment thing. However, I think when the pros and cons come down to for students is it depends upon what you are comparing it to. If you are comparing it to someone who takes their life via traditional suicide means, which can be very traumatic for family members, then human euthanasia is a much more peaceful experience where family members can be with you. The cons are, if you compare someone who dies by human euthanasia due to mental illness to someone who lives and perhaps recovers, that's the question, is what if they could have recovered? And is this making it too easy to get out of their pain? Other students will argue that everyone has the right to decide if life is worth it to them or not. So it's definitely a controversial issue. Okay, tough topic, intense videos. So I encourage you to just take a few minutes here before you wrap up. You could choose to listen to my song, Sung to Sleep, which was a family favorite from my childhood. And you could take 3 deep breaths. Just notice what emotions or sensations you're experiencing and where they're happening in your body, and just kind of let them go before you move on to the rest of your day.